specializing in financial technologies and transformation. So let's get right into this. Work. Next slide. There we go. So goal of today's webinar, obviously, is to discuss what a rolling forecast really means and how you can move towards one. So I came up with this idea because I've heard a lot of people talk about a rolling forecast at a very high level. Oh, sorry, the slides might not be catching up. There we go. I've heard people talk about rolling forecast at a very high level, but you don't often hear what are the pitfalls, what does it actually mean, or what are the challenges you face as you're putting something into, as you're bringing something to life. So I wanted to just really share what I've heard about that, what I've seen different organizations do, and hopefully, give you some guidance as you start working on your journey of moving your organization to a rolling forecast. We might, if the time permits, might do a small technology demo in here as well. We'll see, we're only booked for 45 minutes, so we'll time check near the end and see where it goes. Just quick, if you have any issues with connectivity or anything else, feel free to just put questions into the chat, or if you've got any questions on the content, we're monitoring that, so feel free to just type it into the chat and we'll make sure to address any questions either via chat or at the end of the webinar. So jumping right in, I want to start out with the alternative to a rolling forecast, which is something referred to as event-based planning. So this is generally what most companies do. Anything that's a annual budget or quarterly forecast, anything like that would be considered an event-based plan, where it's generally based on a calendar. You have something that happens every year, it happens every quarter. A lot of companies do this just because it's simple and it's always how it's been done. So you've got a process where every year you do a budget where you allocate your funds and you come up with your goals for the year. Then you spread that throughout the organization to figure out what should, how are we going to try to get there for the year. Obviously, this happens and a budget will be out of date by the time it's even finished. The processes take a long time to do, and they don't actually provide much insight into the business. They're sort of just here's the number we want to hit as a kind of goal marker to say, how are we doing? Let's try to get to this pole we want to get to. A lot of that's driven by the fact that there's top-down directives. So, the board or the CFO is just dictating that they want to be 5% more profitable or they want to raise revenue by a certain amount, but it's not actually based in things in reality and how we're going to increase sales and how we're going to cut costs. It's more just target seek as opposed to actual insights or strategy about the business. Oftentimes it's just limited to financials as well. So if you're not connecting this all the way through the business, so if you're not connecting this to your raw material prices, if you're not connecting this to your sales numbers, if you're not connecting this to your marketing initiatives, you're not getting the holistic picture of what your business is doing. Processes are often slow, and a lot of this is kind of the tops-down versus bottoms-up disparity. So as anything gets pushed down, it goes down as many levels as you can, but then you get a disparity with people who are building the numbers up from the bottom. So you always end up with this gap that ends up being where a lot of the time goes to address, well, here's the number we got when we pushed down, and here's the number we got when we brought up from the bottom. So you get a lot of kind of yo-yoing or back and forth on how do we close this gap, how do we make up this number. And oftentimes it's sort of just I don't know if we can actually do this, it's just what I think we could potentially try. But it doesn't actually, again, doesn't provide insight. And what it does is it slows your business process decision-making to whatever the event cycle is. So if you have an annual budget, you get a lot of times your company's making big decisions on an annual basis, and they're not having those hard decisions or conversations more often than the annual budget comes along. And so that really, it slows down agility and it kind of strangles innovation, where a lot of agile companies are out there making decisions and moving on them right away. Your company is probably not making those big decisions until next year's budget comes around, and you could be at a 9 to 12 month disadvantage just because you're not moving as fast as the smaller competitors in the market are. So why would you go with a rolling forecast? Some of the goals, obviously the first one, continuously accurate numbers. Everybody wants accurate numbers. What does that mean though? What are the numbers you're looking at with the rolling forecast? Generally, this is kind of defined as you want what's going to happen if there's no change. So if we just keep going as we go and there's no outside factor influence, this is probably what's going to happen. If we don't have any new tariffs come in, this is what we think we can sell, and here's what we think it'll cost. You want to get input from everybody. So this is kind of a mindset shift where a lot of times it's finance-based or it's, central managers or things like that, but you really want to spread the input of data into your systems to those who are involved with the data on a day-to-day basis. So get more people involved who are very much down in the details and know what's happening. A lot of this is kind of based on the fact that most people have some sort of an Excel sheet anyway, likely, across the business on what they're planning to do. So you might as well bring all of those together, have it in a system, and have them all interconnected so you're capturing those inputs, and the people who know the business best are feeding your rolling forecast. But what this helps do is it helps expose the shadows. So, we talked about the disparity between tops down and bottoms up. Oftentimes those disparities or those shadows get lost. They just kind of live out in nowhere, and eventually they come to light when you look at your financials at the end of the year and there's a gap. But this helps bring them to light. This helps expose them earlier so you can see where your organization's really going versus whatever your goals or targets are. Next, you can be data-driven. So, but not necessarily purely data-driven. So obviously, people working in any sort of industry have experience. They have seen decisions made before. They know what's going to work. They know what's not. They've got good hunches about things. But you want to have that backed up by data. And one thing I always think of here is if you've ever seen cities implement soda taxes, it's always based on large numbers of studies about how it's going to make people healthier because they're going to buy less soda. And that seems like the most obvious thing in the world to me. But it's obvious that you have to have those studies because you can't make these large-scale decisions just based on hunches or what you think is going to happen. You need to have your decisions backed up by data, and essentially you want to know where it's going to go, how much or less soda are we going to sell because we implement this tax. So you want to have data behind your decisions to show where we think we're going to go because of this. And the ultimate goal is you want organizational agility. You want to be able to make a decision quickly and move on that. You don't want to be waiting until your annual budget to make a change and change the course of your business. Benefits, obviously, are better decisions. If they're data-driven, you should be, at least second-checking everything, if not more, to make sure whatever you're doing makes sense. And you can move quickly. So whether the decision's right or wrong, you're going to move quick. You don't add cycle time in there. If you fail fast, and you can move on to a different solution. This has a lot of benefit as your organization wants to move quickly because competitors are as well. So making sure you're keeping up with the pace of the market. Organizational implications. I think this is one of the things I want to talk about most is that a lot of organizations really don't get what it means to be in a rolling forecast. And we'll talk about how do we get away from a budget, or can we really live without a budget? And most places that I've worked at that try to implement a rolling budget end up with some sort of compromise where they say, well, what if we just do a snapshot of our rolling forecast, and that ends up being our budget? And what that does is it's sort of a scapegoat where you say, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Everybody gives a thumbs up and says, okay, that works, but the process doesn't really change. So you end up with people who are still going to all the detail they generally go through a budget, but now it's no longer part of the generic system, or you put something in place that makes it much harder to do it. So it makes your budget harder, but the budget still exists, because if you're not changing everything in your organization that's based on a budget, you're really not making any impact on it. So one of the biggest ones that comes to my mind is incentives. So most employee review processes have some sort of budgetary incentive built in on it. You're compensated, or your department's compensated based on how well the department performs versus budget. That's where you get a lot of time going into making the budget number right, arguing over what it should be, transferring costs from one division to another, and that's organizational waste. That's not deciding what's best for it. That's arguing over numbers to make sure that your team gets paid as well as possible. So that's a huge fundamental change to your organization. If you have to switch how the incentives are based, that has to ripple through your entire organization, and that takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort, and generally anything that's not budget-based is probably going to take more time anyway. But the goal is that you're not having as long of conversations. You're having more frequent touch bases, but they're shorter. You don't want to be having, the detailed once-a-year conversation. You want to be having a monthly, quick little, here's what you're doing well, here's where you can improve, things like that. So, and it's not just incentives. There's a ton of other places where budgets are incorporated, so you need to be finding those, and you need to be really changing the process so they're not tied to whatever your annual budget is. And I'm not saying snapshots need to go away, because I think those are still valuable. You always want to have a snapshot to say, well, here's what we thought we were going to do back in December, compare against it in a couple months to see how you did. Or we're going to talk about in a minute what-if scenarios. So if you're planning to make a big initiative change, you should take a snapshot of that what-if scenario to, again, compare against and hopefully follow up on to say, did this initiative succeed? Did it fail? Here's the reasons why. As detailed as that can be is helpful, so you've got all those assumptions in there for here's the demand, here's our cost expectations, all that sort of comparison points that can provide you insight into how any given initiative's going. Most of the comparisons should be focused on last year, though. I'm a big proponent of comparing actuals to actuals, and mostly this is because they have the most insight. You have the most detail in your actuals, and you should have far more detail in your actuals than you do in your forecast. Forecast is higher level. It's assumption-based. It's what you think is going to happen. But if you compare this year's actuals versus last year, you can look at the transactions that occurred. You can look at all the different details. That's where you get the organizational insight. That's where you can see the trends. That's where you can see things that happen, different areas of the company where you're not generally forecasting at that level. And comparing actuals to forecasts really isn't going to provide anything other than how are we tracking towards this goal-seek target for the year. You're generally going to need some sort of a rhythm. Most companies end up monthly. Finance has a monthly close cycle, and that's generally followed up with an update to the forecast coming after that. So you finish your close process, you get all the revenue numbers in, any sort of adjustments you need to make, then you go update that forecast to say, here's what the rest of the year or the continuing rolling 12 months are going to look like. Strategic plan still needs to be accounted for. Generally, people kind of do this as a budget plus. You finish your budget, and you add on a couple more years after that. You need to find how that fits into whatever your new process is. Again, if you're doing what-if scenarios, maybe you can just take a snapshot of whenever you think it's appropriate and add a couple more years on there. We're going to talk again, models should be assumption-based wherever possible. So hopefully you can have as many assumptions in there as possible so you're changing the minimal number of factors to get an accurate strategic plan. This should be based on where you think changes are coming. So if you've got a new division or you're really putting a ton of effort into a new product line, involve those people in the strategic plan, but you don't necessarily need everybody who does the forecast involved in it. Just make the conversation simpler, make it focused, and try to make it as efficient as possible. Realistically, things like that should be guides, but they're not going to be, you're going to maintain it as it gets closer, so it doesn't need to be the most accurate number in the world. And one of the biggest things of a rolling forecast is you want to make more people enabled to drive decisions. The people who are closest to the business probably get the details and the intricacies of it most. So it's a cultural shift to say, we're not going to have people up at top, pushing decisions down the hierarchy. That's not an ideal way for organizations to work these days. You need to be agile and to be reactive to what things are changing. You need people who are in the weeds every day being able to make those decisions. And there's a quote from Steve Jobs that I really like about this. He says, If you want to hire great people and have them stay working for you, you have to be run by ideas, not hierarchies. The best ideas have to win. Otherwise, good people don't stay. And I think this is really emblematic of not just keeping your people around, but how to drive the best organization. You need to be idea-focused. You can't just say, well, this person's my manager, they're making the decisions, I'm just doing my job. So I thought it might be useful to talk through what a rolling forecast could look like, sort of in an ideal state. I think this could provide, again, just a roadmap for what organizations do in an ideal rolling forecast situation. One is time of updates. So at a minimum, it should be weekly. Really, it should just be anytime you know that there's a change. Again, this could be manual input, or you could have it connected to a system if possible. So if you are working on raw material pricing, that data is available for what the price should be 6 months, 9 months, 12 months from now, based on whatever the market thinks. So if that changes, why shouldn't your system change with it? That will provide the most accurate forecast for how much you think it's going to cost to make your product a year from now. Again, whether it's manual or you're linking it in, both are possible. So figuring out what's best for your organization, how much you can do is important as well. And again, I mentioned this before, the numbers should represent the likely outcome. So if we do nothing, what's going to happen to our business, again, 6, 12, 18 months down the road. To jump to the last point, you should have what-if scenarios as well, though. So that's the current situation, is the rolling forecast, but you want your what-if to define any sort of initiatives you have. So if we are going to have a big sales push in the second half of the year, make that a what-if scenario. And to the next point, all functions need to be included. So if that big sales push is coming in November, we're going to need sales involved, obviously, because it's a sales push. Marketing needs to be involved because marketing needs to help campaigns. HR needs to be involved. We might need more people. Operations, because we need to plan for higher inventory. All of these things need to work in coordination. So it doesn't make sense for finance to be the only ones managing the number. Have the people who are in there working on this get into the system and input, well, okay, what do we think this initiative is going to do from a sales perspective? What sort of marketing do we feel like we need to get for this, and what sort of skill set do we lack in our organization to accomplish these goals in the next 6 months? They're the people who are closest to this, and they're going to understand what these initiatives take, so they all need to be inputting their numbers together to come up with what the company's going to do. And finance is sort of the natural driver for all this. At the end of the day, businesses are run by money, and finance is uniquely positioned to take all those inputs and change them into what the financial forecast should be. Again, you don't want that driving the organization. It should be an outcome, but it should be a calculation based on where we're going. And finance is generally the one to then package that up, come up with a reporting on it, and come up with a presentation on, okay, based on everything we got, here's what we think this will do. Here's the value, here's the cost. Is this something we want to go forward with? Rolling forecast has more data and less calculation. So again, not just financially driven. You're not looking at a P&L because that doesn't drive your business. You know, demand drives your business. Costs drive your business. Price drives your business. Market factors drive your business. So a rolling forecast should have as many data sets as you can involved in the process. And they should all be calculation driven wherever possible. You don't want manual input in the process. Manual input should be, potential overrides or anything you can't get. But you should always be striving to bring in more data, bring in more external factors that you don't have to be inputting, and it really makes this rolling forecast a less touch process and more what-ifing and more exception-based, as opposed to something that's constantly needs to be updated by people and ends up being just a pain as opposed to something that really adds value to the organization. It should be in an interconnected system. This doesn't need to happen, but to me the ideal state is everybody's working on a rolling forecast in a single tool. I've seen places where some people are inputting Excel, some people are inputting an Access database, and it's all kind of consolidated in one place. But what that really does is it adds lead time in there where things need to be brought together, things need to be calculated, and you lose the reporting impact where you can no longer see who made changes where, you can't see the details behind it. People end up in Excel workbooks and other places that you have no visibility to. So you lose the ability to drill into where did this number come from, where are the data sets that fed this, how can I derive something different if you don't have all of that in an interconnected system. So now I want to talk about first steps. So if you want to launch a process to get a rolling forecast going in your organization, how do I take that first step? My first advice would be just define it. What do you think that should look like? What do you see the process looking like to get to a rolling forecast? Who's doing the coordination? Who owns the numbers? Who owns the reporting on this? What are the technologies? So I just mentioned bringing in as many data sets as you can. What do you think is available for your company? Can I bring in, market data from Nielsen or somebody like that? Do I have that now? What is my ideal state for data out there? As well as, what system are we doing this in? And, what do we need from a company perspective to get there? The biggest thing is going to be getting support. So as we mentioned, there's a ton of organizational changes that need to happen to get a rolling forecast up and running, and a lot of that's going to be painful for people. People don't want to change if they don't have to, so you're going to need someone who is really willing to drive the organization to get to a more agile state. It's not easy. It's going to take a lot of pain and a lot of fighting, and if you don't have that support, it's something that's going to be thrown to the wayside pretty quickly because doing a budget is easy. It's what we've always done. Why would we change that? Determining the change required is also a big step. You're going to need to figure out what do we need to do, how will this impact the organization. That will obviously be one of the early questions that will come up. You might not have all the answers, but it's good to define as much as possible so people know what's coming. And what I'd say is let's start in the middle and work out. So what I mean by this is, you don't want your rolling forecast to be financial driven, but that is the intended outcome. You want to see how much income are we going to have for this organization. So start with that, get a good solid foundation, and then start adding in other phases. Start adding sales numbers in there. Start adding raw material pricing or cost of goods sold numbers in there. Start adding employee expenses in there. Work in those phases to get to where you need to be. And if one of your goals is really removing budgets, just be aware that generally comes late in the process. So you need to have some intermediary in there to figure out how are we going to do budget until we think we can organizationally remove that from our processes. Because until everybody's off of it, everybody's going to need to do a budget. So it's one of the last steps in the process to sort of get removed is once everybody's up and running, then we get rid of it. And I recommend working in phases as opposed to a, potential big bang solution just because it's so much change that it's really hard to coordinate, especially a large organization, to just all of a sudden flip a switch and you go from a budget process to a rolling forecast process. That takes immense amounts of coordination, and a lot of times I've seen it fall flat, whereas if you can step into it and you can slowly work your way there, I think it's going to be much more successful in the long run. So what are some of the biggest challenges to overcome with a rolling forecast? Stakeholder coordination. How do I get everybody in the system updating at the same time? Again, I mentioned you probably want people at least weekly in there changing it, so stakeholder coordination is really important. Or essentially, how do you get everybody to be collaborative in the system together? How do I know that people have updated their numbers? That's a big challenge with the rolling forecast. How do I have a complex model? There's a lot of maintenance with that, and how do I get that single source of the truth? It's really tough to have some areas have a very detailed model. It's maybe not the same model across your entire organization, so can I build one model over here, different model over here, and not have a giant mess of formulas and calculations I need to maintain, or a bunch of different data sources. So whatever you're doing needs to be comprehensive. And then finally, you need to be able to adapt to plans quickly and keep everything up to date. So if I need to make a what-if scenario because a new idea came up to start that sales initiative this fall, how do I get everybody into the system to make those changes quickly and efficiently? So whatever your solution is needs to be continuous as well. So, we obviously work with technology implementation. So from a technology perspective, how do you overcome that? So for something to be collaborative, solution needs to be easy. People need to be able to, they don't have to learn a system every time they need to make a change. They need to be able to just log in and know where they're going, make something that's intuitive and easy to use. Something needs to be comprehensive. So for it to be comprehensive, it needs to be powerful. You need to be able to model anything, analyze your entire business, drill down, find where the differences are, run comparisons, get details about who's making changes, who's in the system, getting statuses on what needs to be done, what's the workflow. All that needs to happen within your tool. And then to be continuous, you need to be able to model and adapt quickly. So again, people need to be able to log in, make a change, and see the outcome right away. And not just that, you need to be able to make changes to your model. Your business is changing, and it should be changing. So if we're working on a new pricing scheme for our products, we need to be able to model that in a system right away and see what the number comes out to be if we start working in this new format. So you need to have a tool that you can make changes fast and have the numbers accurate or represented accurately right away. So I want to take have a brief talk about what comes next for finance. So if you're getting to the point where you think you can have a rolling forecast, where are we going from here? What's technology bringing to finance's plate? So right now we're probably somewhere in just to the right of the second line, where we've gone from being able to capture data to being able to analyze data to now doing sort of advanced analytics and more automation. Obviously, people are in the cloud now. That's helping reduce cost and make tools simpler from an end user perspective. But we're getting more advanced analytics where, you can use machine learning to draw correlations that you might not see in your data. So having advanced algorithms that are really driving your business is becoming key. Visualization. It's much easier to spot issues when things are highlighted or where you can see a graph go up, and then down. Visualization is becoming a key component of all reporting and all finance processes. Automation, obviously, is a big thing. In-memory computing has made giant technological changes because now you're able to handle much larger data sets quickly, so you don't have to wait a ton of time for things to calculate. Things can happen almost instantaneously. And then potentially blockchain in the future. I'm sure you guys have all heard of Bitcoin. There's a lot of companies working now towards building ERP systems based on blockchain, so you no longer have to have complicated processes to log transactions. Things happen automatically, helping reduce close cycles, help improve visibility, and reduce audit necessities as well. So what are the new finance norms going to be? I'll cite the book later on, but I've read that within the next 10 years, most financial forecasts will be machine learning based. That's a huge shift where, today you're probably having most people input the data, but in the future, that will get to a point where a computer is able to build a forecast, and really what they're going to get better at is they're going to be able to describe why they think the forecast is going that way or what they think they can do to affect it. So not just making the calculations smarter, but really building out that automated storytelling behind the numbers that exist in finance. Everything's going to become self-service. Again, that's just the new norm. So places are getting there now, but realistically it's going to be, I want to see this data. I'm able to just quickly log in, run a report, and see it right away. Anybody in the organization who has access will be able to do that pretty quickly. Cycle time is going to be essentially removed. So instead of having to have a monthly close process where everything gets, revenue gets journaled entry in, I'm still amazed at how many companies enter their revenue into their ERP system by doing a journal entry every month, but it happens a lot. But that's going to become real time. So if a customer checks something out online, as soon as they hit ship, that transaction's logged in the sales system, automatically moved to the ERP system. and in real time is brought to your analytics solution. So the next time you run a report, the newest transaction is included on the dashboard you run. More data. We're obviously building more devices that are connected. Everybody is now, has smartphones in their pockets, and people are wearing smart watches. Like, that will continue. We'll continue to see more places that are capturing data in people's everyday lives. And the smartest companies are going to be using that data and bringing it together to make smarter decisions. So we're going to continue to see more and more data added to everything you do in your business process. And there's going to be fewer touch points. So like I mentioned before, rolling forecast, you want to have everything calculation-based where possible. That's going to continue to be the trend. Computers are going to continue to make more decisions and run more calculations, and humans are going to become a smaller and smaller portion of that process. Now, it seems like we have some time, so I do want to get in and show a tool that can provide a situation or an environment to be fast, easy, and powerful, so might help you in your process to getting to a rolling forecast. It's called Adaptive Insights. It's brought to you by Workday. And what it is, it's a comprehensive planning, reporting, and analytics solution. So you're able to plan your numbers, run a report right away, drill into that number, see the dashboards around that number, all instantaneously. Everything in Adaptive is real-time calculation, so if I make a change, the next time someone runs a report, that number's included in it. You never have to run processes on the back end. You never have to do anything to make sure everything's calculated or data's moved between cubes. Everything's constantly up to date. And just as an example, you can look at your net product revenue. If, say, I want to see what are my top products and who are my top customers, you can click on a revenue actual number and have the ability to drill in by product. Say you want to continue drilling in from there. I want to see, well, who are the top customers for that product? I can click down and see more information about who those customers are. Or say you want to see who are your top customers overall. You don't even have to click back to the prior screen. Just go up to the top, and you can come down and see who are my top customers overall. It's a really unique solution where you can have all of those changes represented right away. It really fits into, we were talking about what-if scenarios before. You have the ability to build as many different versions as you want. It doesn't affect the performance of the system. It's really a free system where you can do, or sorry, not free, it's free where you can have as many versions as you want to do whatever analysis you need to do. So if you've got your current working version that represents what's probably going to happen, and you want to build a what-if to say, what are we going to do, what happens if we hire people earlier in the year because we want to drive more sales? Well, you can have a report that shows forecast versus a working forecast, your snap versus what's happening. And right now, obviously, you see those numbers are the same. But then I'm just going to go over to my personnel sheet. And this tool's great because you can open things in new tabs. And say, we've got a new account executive who's going to be hired in October. Say I want to move that up. Let's have that new account executive start at the beginning of July. Making a comment to move hire up to 7/1. And this is a fully interconnected system where that's going to calculate the fact that account executives have this ramp-up period and are expected to sell this much every month. So I should see more revenue. Obviously, employees starting earlier means we're going to have more expense, so I should see a higher expense number as well. So I can come back to this report, hit run, and I'm going to see, yes, by moving that employee up, I was able to increase my revenue by 2%. Cost of goods sold went up a little bit, but overall my contribution margin increased by 4%. Obviously, expenses and allocations increased, but say I want more detail on what expenses and allocations increased. I can drill into that number and see that my payroll number went up as expected. But also, my IT allocation went up and my training allocation went up. So, I had more training costs because I brought someone in earlier in the year, as well as, the IT allocation is headcount based. So I know that adding that person earlier in the year brought up my IT allocation. Everything here is calculation based, so, it affects my current assets, affects my equity, as well as it affects my cash flow. So, we're going to have to spend more right away, but we're also going to get more revenue in. Those calculations can all be built into the system, so you have a live system showing changes as they happen. It's a very simple system to use, and all reporting can be exception-based, which is a lot of where companies are going today. You don't want to be looking through all the numbers and just seeing what happened. You want to be having more frequent touch points and just seeing, where did I miss? Where are my actuals off versus the most recent snapshot I took? This tool fits really well into a rolling forecast because it allows you to do so much exception-based reporting. It allows you to drill in wherever you need to as well. So T&E is way off here. I can click and drill into which levels had that variance. And I can see that my sales north region was the reason I'm off on my T&E budget or my T&E forecast. So it's just a quick demo. eCapital Advisors represents multiple tools that can help accomplish a rolling forecast, but I wanted to just give you guys a quick visibility into one of them. We'll get back in here. I mentioned before, this is based on, most of this presentation is based on a book by Adaptive Insights called Plan to Win. Feel free to go to their website to check it out. But now I wanted to really open it up for questions. So does anybody have any questions? We'll log in and check real quick. Right. We got one. How could machine learning be used to predict forecasts? As I mentioned before, I think it's going to be kind of two-part. As more data comes in, they're going to have more to work with, and they're going to be much better about finding data, finding interconnections between data, and using that to predict what's going to happen. Obviously, anything future-looking is generally time series-based, but computers are going to get much more accurate with that as the data sets increase. And I mentioned before, storytelling can increase as well, so it's really going to change finance's job. Finance has a storytelling job, so as machine learning gets better, it's going to be better at telling why those changes are happening and kind of providing that visibility to it. Which types of companies or types of leaders are you seeing be most open to making this agile change? I would say it's all companies. I would say the type of leader is probably the bigger distinguishing factor. There's some people, and it's kind of almost personality-based. A lot of people see that change is the new name of the game, and they're willing to embrace that we need to be a more agile solution, and they see the picture of having constant up-to-date numbers and how that really can distinguish you from your competition. Whereas other personalities say, this is how we've always done it, this works, I don't know why we'd change it. So I have seen a lot of, and it's just, again, as I mentioned, you need support for your change within the organization, so you need to find who those people are and be realistic about if they're able to drive that level of change within your organization. Do you have a general set of general steps roadmap to this change, knowing that there are choices in here? High level, I mentioned, you generally start with income statement as a starting point. I usually go from low-hanging fruit. So what's going to be the easiest one to do from there? Is it demand planning afterwards? Is it HR or workforce planning? What's going to be the next easiest step to just continue to build support for your plan, your process throughout the organization? Just do with what's easiest right away to get to your final picture of everything you want involved in your rolling forecast. Is this tool similar to Tableau or Power BI? This tool, Tableau and Power BI, I would consider more pure analytics tools, where you're connecting it to a bunch of different data sources and you're doing, a bunch of self-service analytics and reporting based on that data. A tool like Adaptive Insights is more of a planning and budgeting tool where it has analytics in there, and they're very good at analytics. They might not be to the level of, a Tableau or Power BI, because those are the best-in-class tools on the market, but it also has the capability to do the planning and budgeting within there as well. So you can change the numbers, you can have calculations. It's essentially a replacement for Excel, where you're no longer building out models for how the business is going to run in an Excel workbook, linking all those Excel workbooks together. It's a system where people can do that. And again, you capture that detail. You get that traceability of what are these models. Do we have consistent models across the organization? A lot of times people waste time I wouldn't say waste time, they use a lot of time in a forecasting process by pulling data, and you'll have 10 people all pulling the same data set. Well, if you can load that in once and have it automated and save all those people all that time every month, you're going to have a huge benefit to the organization, and then have that forecast calculated based off that data set. So similar to it, but a little different. If you guys want any more information or you want to reach out about anything else, feel free to email me. My email is on the screen. Okay. Thanks, everyone.